Now, for more on the USMCA, US-Canada relations, and the future of global trade, we're joined by Brai Odion-Esene. He's the founder of SW4 Insights, a public policy advisory firm. Welcome, Brai.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with a look at the visit itself. How important is it that Prime Minister Trudeau is here in DC, not just meeting with President Trump, but also congressional leaders?
Well, I think on its own, it's not going to make a material difference to whether the pact gets ratified by Congress or not. But I think what Trudeau was trying to achieve here was because Canada's made it clear they will not vote to ratify this deal unless they see some movement on the U.S. side. And I think the plan is for Canadians is to vote almost simultaneously with when key votes are being made here in the U.S. So I think he came over here to get a sense from House Democrats, Nancy Pelosi in particular, to see how much progress is being made, how close they are to rubber stamping this deal, and then taking that intel back to Canada with him.
We know that Mexico has ratified the deal, but where does the ratification process stand for the US and Canada?
So I think on the US side, the House Democrats have made it clear that they still have some concerns with this deal as it relates to enforcement provisions within the deal, labor standards on Mexican part especially, and other requirements. And I think what's happening right now is a discussion between House Democrats, and they formed a working group I think they meet with the administration next week, and they will negotiate around these things. Some have said they want the text to be reopened and extra provisions added. That, of course, will require additional work to then take it back to Mexico and Canada to get it ratified. I think what's more likely is a side agreement between the US and Mexico around these labor standards, around environmental standards, and that's what's going to happen. On the Canadian end, they've got elections coming up in October. So they need to get this done before then, because then the math will be very different after these elections pass. I think Trudeau is here, and it exemplifies why he made the trip, to make it clear to House Democrats, I think, that if this deal is going to make it through, they need to get it done at least by September.
And speaking of elections, obviously we know when this process started, Enrique Peña Nieto was the Mexican president. That has changed. And elections coming up in Canada, elections obviously here in the US in 2020. How much is the political pressure weighing on the discussions overall, trying to really secure a deal so that voters can be impressed by this?
Well, the cynic in me would say House Democrats are perhaps a little reluctant to give Trump a victory that he can take on the campaign trail with him. But on the other hand, they also need to show that they've done something besides talk about impeachment for the past 2 years they've been in power. So there's that tug of war happening between giving Trump a victory, but also showing they can work with the president and also deliver on priorities that impact American workers, American farmers, etc. So I think there's that aspect in there as well that's playing a role in this.
And in terms of upgrades from the old NAFTA agreement, what are some of the ones that really stand out, and which are the areas and sort of sectors that could be getting some pushback?
Well, I think definitely U.S. dairy farmers benefit here, because the USTR pushed to open the Canadian market to more U.S. exports of dairy. So I think there's a clear benefit there. You also see higher rules of origin for U.S. auto manufacturers, which means more has to be made here in the U.S. before it's, in usual supply chain terms, either shipped to Mexico or Canada for final completion and then brought back. So I think you're seeing the Trump agenda come through in this, where they want more done here in the U.S. And Robert Lighthizer, the USTR rep, has made it clear that in any trade deal he negotiates, his first question is, how will this make an American richer? And that's a benchmark that I think this clears slightly. I wouldn't say a lot, but slightly.
And do we get the sense that Canadian lawmakers are open to this, having sort of this issue with their agriculture industry opening up?
Well, I think it was one of those things where it could have been worse. I think a lot of people you talk to on both the Mexican and Canadian side, I think that's where they ended up, where it's not so much that they were willing to break up with a new deal and open it up, but also they thought, you know what, given Trump and how unpredictable this president is, let's acquiesce to some things and avoid him nullifying the deal completely.
And what about other issues that are being discussed between Trump and Trudeau? Overall, how does all this affect their relationship?
Well, I think, remember last year when they met and there was a lot of acrimonious afterwards, I think that seems to be patched up, because they both realize that they need this deal to go through, because again, the elections are coming up, they both need this to take on the campaign trail and show respective voters that they've worked hard for them and defended their interests. And so I think they're willing to put that aside for now. But again, a lot can happen between now and next year, and who knows what else might come up that might set off either side to again go back to casting accusations of one another.
And speaking of what's coming up, we know that President Xi and President Trump are set to meet in Osaka, Japan for the G20. Canada hasn't necessarily secured time with President Xi, but President Trump said he would bring Canada's issues to their attention. In terms of the global trade picture, how do you see the China-US-Canada relationship developing?
Well, I think focusing solely on the Trump-Xi meeting, I think the mistake that was made last time when they met in November after the G20 meeting in Argentina was the assumption that all these issues could be solved in 6 months. And so odds are there'll be another truce agreed to with a time frame where they expect something to be done. But I think there needs to be more realism this time, that these issues take longer than a few months to settle, and you can't substitute short-term political victories for real substantial conversations.
Especially, obviously, with economies of this size. Exactly. Thank you so much. Always good to have you on. Brai Odion-Esene there, founder of SW4 Insights, a public policy advisory firm.